Hey out there people, today I've got an exciting video for you relating to some ongoing internet drama. It's been a while since I covered internet drama because I've tried my best not to engage with it, but it rears its ugly head yet again. And furthermore, I think that this case has something interesting to tell us about how we perceive the world. So this is a video about Rollerwave, which is an aesthetic I created and which is now being deleted and scrubbed from the internet for no reason whatsoever. Let's get into it. So I created Rollerwave in 2021, which now that I think about it was 3 entire years ago. So it was around for 3 years, and I created it on the Aesthetics Wiki, which is on Fandom, and it's a wiki for aesthetics. It's ostensibly the most accessible collection of aesthetics out there. So this is a collaborative effort like Wikipedia or Wikipedia or whatever, where if you notice a given aesthetic, or you notice an aesthetic that isn't documented or cataloged yet, and isn't like recognized by people as an aesthetic, even though it obviously is very much a cohesive aesthetic, then you can go on and create a page and say, here's an aesthetic, here's some visual examples of this aesthetic, here's some history related to this aesthetic, where it developed, where it originated, etc. And so I did this with Rollerwave. Rollerwave, as I envisioned it, was basically 70s futurism, but I noticed that the Aesthetics Wiki was lacking in that department. They had a page on atom punk, and they had a page on retro futurism more broadly, but 70s futurism is a very, very unique form of visual storytelling. I'm talking about movies like Rollerball and Death Race 2000 and THX 1138, which are some of my favorite science fiction movies of all time. Not necessarily because their plots make sense or anything. I think for the most part their plots are like really stupid, with the exception of THX 1138, I guess. But I just really like how they fucking look. Those movies have always looked the coolest to me out of any movies. And I understand that there are a lot of millennials out there who have fond memories of the 1980s, and that's why the 1980s aesthetic is so big, and everyone's like, oh, I miss the Terminator, I miss RoboCop, I miss Total Recall. That type look has always looked kind of gross and mushy to me. And I love the sleek, modern type clamshell look and feel of like Death Race 2000, Rollerball. Even A Clockwork Orange, to a certain extent, has this really nice, sleek, modernist, chic, like colorful, trippy, psychedelic type look. Not necessarily trippy or psychedelic, because we're not talking about the late 1960s. We're talking about the mid 1970s. So we're talking about like the idea of the future that was prevailing through most of the Jimmy Carter era, which I've always found more appealing than the Ronald Reagan era. I don't see why so many people latch on to the 1980s, because it's such a sad, bleak decade, and the 70s have this kind of hopeful optimism that I really latch on to, this nice, bright, shiny veneer. And, you know, sure, it's all kind of fake, and, you know, it's not like the 1970s didn't come with their own share of problems. And in fact, 1970s futurist movies explore that in really interesting ways that 1980s futurist movies simply don't. But I really like the look and the feel and the texture. There's something in 1970s futurism that's always spoke to me, especially with revival films like Beyond the Black Rainbow, which takes place in this vast underground compound with a very, very psychedelic 1970s, 1960s type aesthetic to it. When I watched Beyond the Black Rainbow for the first time, I really connected with it in a way that few other movies connect with me, because I just went, that is a cool fucking look for a movie to have. That's a really, really cool looking movie right there. It understands this aesthetic of 1970s futurism completely. So, because the term 1970s futurism is kind of clunky, I decided to call this aesthetic that I was writing a page on for the Aesthetics Wiki Rollerwave, because I felt that there was also a musical component that went along with the aesthetic. I'm talking about Moog synthesizers, the type of music that's present in films like Death Race 2000 and Rollerball, the squeaky clean sterile atmosphere of a Jimmy Carter era shopping mall. I'm talking about hyper-technological futurism and consumerism, but not like in the 1980s, like in the 1970s. And I also intended for Rollerwave to serve as a 1970s counterpart to Vaporwave, because obviously Outrun is the visual corresponding aesthetic to Synthwave, which is for the 1980s, and then Vaporwave is more so for the 1990s, and Vaporwave is both the visual and musical style. So what I intended was for Rollerwave to serve as a catch-all term for any piece of 1970s futurist media, visual or musical, that dealt with themes of like oil depletion or environmentalism or like early electronic type music. One example I pointed to in an early draft of the Rollerwave page on the Aesthetics Wiki was Boards of Canada, because of course Boards of Canada has always been talked about in music circles as if there isn't really a definitive music genre that it can be placed into. Like, they're very different from other music, and that's one of the things I really like about them, because they use equipment from the 1970s with the production sensibilities of the late 90s and early 2000s. So what you get is this music that sounds a lot like the 1970s, but using techniques that weren't possible in the 1970s, or technically were possible because they used that equipment, but just was never tried out. And the result is fucking phenomenal. Music Has the Right to Children is one of my favorite albums ever, and most people just define it as EDM, and I wouldn't really put it in the same category as like Aphex Twin or something. Yeah, it is EDM, it's electronic dance music, but the retrospective sensibility needs to be denoted there. So there needs to be a term that says this isn't just EDM, this is also like a very 70s tinged type piece with a lot of sensibilities from an older time. It's very, very different from like Daft Punk or Aphex Twin, who obviously create the sound of the future. Of course, Daft Punk also, then again, have some extremely Rollerwave type sensibilities. Not on all their stuff, but definitely on stuff like Electroma. The movie Electroma is very, very Rollerwavy, at least in how it's designed, with the desert look and the Daft Punk car, and the scene where they're like, you know, feeling each other in the room with the silhouettes, and all that is very, very Rollerwave adjacent. So I took this as kind of the building blocks. I mentioned that adult contemporary stuff from the period, like Billy Joel, could be considered kind of soft Rollerwave, and then more heavy stuff like Boards of Canada might be considered harder Rollerwave. But I put together a loose canon. I said that like Devo was Rollerwavy, definitely Boards of Canada, early Devo, Blondie, and like Sesame Street. Of course, all the Sesame Street segments from the 1970s, because they all have a very, very cohesive 70s type look. Sesame Street largely defined the 1970s with segments like Crackmaster and all of that, and that's why people remember that stuff, because it's very, very visually distinct, and that's why it's also used in Boards of Canada music videos. Also stuff like Jules Pfeiffer with A Barrel of Laughs and A Veil of Tears. That's very Rollerwave. That's hella Rollerwave. Dan and Neil with Odd Bodkins. Or like The Point, the Harry Nilsson animated TV special. That is Rollerwave as fuck. And I thought about it, and I realized, yes, this is a cohesive aesthetic. If I look at all these things together in a unified canon, it all completely makes sense. This is very, very much something that I would consider an aesthetic. So I put this entire list together, and I clicked publish 3 years ago, And for 3 years, the Rollerwave page sat completely undisturbed for the most part. And in fact, lots of figures on the aesthetics wiki were like, oh, I was going to make a 1970s aesthetics page, but you clearly are more familiar with this type of media and you consume a lot more of it than I do. So this page is fine. Rollerwave it is. This is an accepted aesthetic now that we've accepted as a valid look and feel to things. And it makes complete sense. Yeah, Rollerwave is definitely a thing. From the beginning, getting people interested in Rollerwave was an uphill battle because I recognized that the 90s and 80s are popular decades mainly just because people grew up in them, and people who grew up in the 70s, like Gen X, are much less likely to remember it favorably and haven't really done a good job of pointing it out as like a fun, positive era that more people should look into. So the 1970s aesthetic and feel is just languished in obscurity, I feel like, for the most part. And people aren't nostalgic for it, even though if you're nostalgic for a time before you're born anyway, that's some serious bullshit. And I don't even experience nostalgia. I'm not really nostalgic for the 1970s. I just like how they fucking looked. I just like the look. It's not like I want to go back to them. I just prefer it over the 80s and 90s look. I don't know why, but something about it just really fucking draws me in. And that's my personal lived experience. I can't deny that I prefer the 70s look over the 80s and 90s look. And at the end of the day, I think it's very exclusionary that there isn't a retro-futuristic 70s counterpart genre of music and visuals to complement vaporwave and synthwave, vaporwave and outrun respectively in the visual medium. So all I was really doing here was filling an obvious gap in the market that needed to be figured out. But right off the bat, Rollerwave headed into some problems and faced a lot of conflict. For instance, a lot of people just thought it was a disco aesthetic because, as it happens, there's also a disco page on the aesthetics wiki, and I had to insist, no, Rollerwave doesn't really deal with disco. That was an actual trend of the time that went on kind of separately from Rollerwave, which would involve much more so stuff like, yes, prog rock, mini Moog synthesizers, not so much the fun party atmosphere, you know, the dance floor, the disco ball, colorful lights. We're talking more sterile colors, like the facilities in Rollerball and THX 1138, movies that maybe you haven't seen, but that do have a very cohesive 1970s futurist type aesthetic to them. So I had to clarify multiple times on the aesthetics wiki that no, this isn't like disco. I mean, it's kind of related, but it's not disco. That the 1970s, just like now, and this is something that people in the present day don't seem to understand, that the 1970s weren't just one aesthetic. Every period of time has multiple aesthetics going on simultaneously. Like the 1960s wasn't just the hippie aesthetic. You had multiple movements and schools of thought and ways of looking at the world going on at the same time. You had completely different art in Greenwich Village versus San Francisco versus Boulder. They were entirely separate modes of being and looking at things and painting and all kinds of stuff. People took different approaches in past decades the same way they take different approaches now. And I think living in the oversaturated internet age where you have access to a resource as extensive as the aesthetics wiki can make you forget that art has always been eclectic and diverse, and there are different ways of looking at things. So I had to point out, no, the 70s weren't just a disco-looking decade. There were multiple aesthetics, and this refers very specifically to a clean, slicked-back, modern-type, futurist look that is very specific to a very specific set of albums and movies. It seemed like people just didn't get it though, so I decided to take a different approach. Instead of just cataloging this obvious collection of movies and music that all have a very, very similar type aesthetic and look and feel to them, I decided to market Rollerwave out a little bit and see how far it could spread across the internet as maybe a legitimate cultural movement. Maybe it would pick up some steam. Maybe I would come to be recognized as the progenitor of an artistic movement of my very own. This was kind of before I started making Denver New Wave, or when that concept was very fetal in my mind. So it was a long ways before that, and I thought, hey, maybe I can just make rollerwave music and prove that it's a real aesthetic, and also the internet will latch onto it, because obviously back in like 2011 or 2010 or whenever, when Daniel Lopatin released Echo Jams and started Vaporwave out, and actually he didn't start Vaporwave out, there's plenty of videos that go into how like MF Doom created beats that sound a lot like Vaporwave way before Daniel Lopatin, and JPEG Mafia released Dreamcast Summer Songs, which is way more the first Vaporwave album than frickin' Echo Jams. But I figured, maybe I can be kind of a Daniel Lopatin figure, except instead of spreading nostalgia for the 1980s and 90s with Vaporwave, I can do it for the 70s with Rollerwave, and I can be the Daniel Lopatin of Rollerwave. So I decided to take up the pseudonym Dan Frost, and then I made Dan Frost a character in my ARG, Hypnagogic Archive. The backstory basically was that Dan Frost created these 2 albums in Rhode Island, then he moves to Colorado and becomes a volunteer at the Hypnagogic Archive. First, he creates these 2 Rollerwave albums, these mysterious albums, projects that get lost and then get found again through mysterious circumstances. I built up an entire mythos around it. These album covers, these gorgeous album covers for it that perfectly conveyed the feeling and understanding of Rollerwave and what Rollerwave was. So I was like, I'm going to make an entire album and then an entire other album just to communicate what I'm feeling and what needs to be communicated with Rollerwave. And it'll do for the 70s what Vaporwave did for the 80s. So I went into full force with it, and sure enough, just like I expected, the internet behaved extremely predictably. All these blog posts popped up. Most of them are still accessible via Google search engine if you just type in Rollerwave in quotes. There's like blogs and Pinterests and all kinds of things across the web saying Rollerwave, oh, here's a cool aesthetic. Top 10 cool aesthetics you need to try. Top 10 cool aesthetics on TikTok. And obviously part of this was because it had a page on the aesthetics wiki, so that lended it a kind of credibility, a kind of legitimacy that it wouldn't have exactly otherwise. And obviously lots of people just used the page I wrote on the aesthetics wiki as a source for it.
Rollerwave was created as a response to Vaporwave, as Rollerwave wants to do for the 70s as Vaporwave does for the 80s. The name comes from the 1970s film Rollerball, which is a science fiction dystopian film, but it's relevant since the world it takes place in still oozes the 70s flair.
But it became its own thing. It was put on Pinterest and Tumblr, and people bought into it. People really liked it. There's an entire blog on Tumblr called Rollerwave Gallery that someone started up just to kind of document individual entries in the genre. It put Taxi Driver in there, which I don't really agree with, because Taxi Driver is very much its own thing, but whatever. It's a neat fucking blog, and it's amazing to think that there are people on the internet who took this thing I invented, this term I created, and just kind of used it. And I didn't really care that they didn't give me credit or anything, because at the end of the day, a wiki's a collaborative effort, and I acknowledge that. I was just glad that it was getting some traction. Finally, the 70s are getting their due attention. People are paying attention to this thing, even if they don't really understand it and as deep as I do. People are starting to appreciate. So that was really cool. Then I released the 2 Dan Frost music videos, and the two Dan Frost albums, and they got pretty rave reviews from the people who heard them. And in fact, I have them released on cassette. They're part of the Hypnagogic Archive Value Pack. If you want to buy it on cassette, it's available. But they're also on YouTube, so just go listen to them for free. They're really fucking interesting. They're some of the most interesting music I've ever made. They're like remixes of like Dick Cavett and Andre Previn, and I think a little Giorgio Moroder in there, a little Magma. It's like a really interesting eclectic blend of, again, doing exactly what Vaporwave did for the 80s and 90s, but with the 70s. Suddenly you don't have like, a fucking video game commercial slowed down. You just have like a pizza spin commercial slowed down. And I tried to make it kind of a meme that just like how Arizona Iced Tea is with Vaporwave, right? Because like that's a big meme. There's always Arizona Iced Tea with Vaporwave. I was like pizza spins with Rollerwave, because pizza spins are, I think, a pretty cool snack, and nobody seems to remember them or give them enough attention. So it's like pizza spins, a Rollerwave is fuck, and I reference pizza spins all over.
You could almost taste the cheese, the peppers, even the tomatoes. They named them pizza spins. Can humans resist pizza spin?
I was just having a lot of fun with it and creating this entire new look and feel, and it was absolutely thrilling. I was having such a great time. Both the music videos and albums came out, and people liked them, as far as I know. I mean, they didn't go that far, but I thought, well, in time they'll become cult classics. They'll be looked at with the same amount of reverence that we today look at fucking Echo Jams or Floral Shop. People will look back at Rollerwave and go, oh wow. So I had this whole marketing campaign put out, not even for monetary gain on my end, but I just wanted to create something kind of cool and viral and that people could latch onto and enjoy. And I thought that was really neat. I asked one of my friends, Vaporwave Master One, on the Agora Road forum to post a thread about it, and that got huge and ended up resulting in like the definitive image of Vaporwave, which is like some lady from a magazine ad or something with like this really cool rainbow shirt. I was aware the entire time that what I was doing was kind of disingenuous, and now that I think about it, Denver New Wave is a much more legitimate aesthetic for me that I latch onto a lot more, just basically because Rollerwave, I wasn't alive in the 70s. I'm Gen Z, and me kind of fetishizing this era is as disingenuous and fake as people, reviving punk without really understanding what made punk important as a social movement, or, the whole When We Were Young tour. It does seem kind of inauthentic in retrospect, and I don't want to be inauthentic, and that's why I think Denver New Wave makes a lot more sense to me, because I am from Denver, so Denver New Wave as a genre speaks to me a lot more. When I created Denver New Wave, I didn't know that there was like an entire history to it, but now I understand that I do have forebears in the genre who made their own contributions to it, and it's an entire like completely overlooked history that's absolutely fascinating. The idea that Denver was a pivotal spot for new wave music in the 1980s, that's not manufactured by me. That's a real history that actually happened. But nonetheless, I think it's important to recognize Rollerwave as a legitimate aesthetic unto itself. I would say aesthetics are cool, and I personally like looking at aesthetics in big galleries of cohesive vibes. People say they hate aesthetics because it's just a Gen Z TikTok thing, but it's really not. It's been a component of graphic design since the inception of graphic design as a thing. And I think it's really cool that we have so many different ways of looking at stuff and so many different ways of interpreting art. And I don't know, something about that just really connects with me. But part of the problem I noticed with the aesthetics wiki early on, it's a collaborative effort. It's a wiki, So you're going to have a lot of personal bias. For instance, I tried to write a page on an aesthetic called comic core, where I was like, well, comics are a very unique visual storytelling medium and have a lot of unique signifiers that only happen in comics. So like if I look at something like Sappho by E.C. Seeger or Polly and Her Pals by Cliff Sterrett, both of which are fantastic works of art, I notice a distinct aesthetic come to light, like for instance the 4-panel color printing process where you have characters with dots inside of them. That's a unique thing to the comic medium that was introduced purely out of technical necessity. So the aesthetics wiki already had a page for an aesthetic called cartoon core because everyone on this wiki is just a fucking Gen Zer or millennial who grew up watching like Dexter's Lab and Courage the Cowardly Dog and shit. And I didn't grow up reading that or watching that. I grew up reading like Thimble Theater by E.C. Seeger, Sappho by E.C. Seeger, Polly and Her Pals by Cliff Sterrett. That's what I grew up watching. So I figured, oh, surely if these people can create an aesthetic that's just like, oh, it's like Dexter's Lab for imaginary friends or whatever, that I could create an aesthetic based on like Crazy Cat. Because, of course, Crazy Cat has a recognizable and cohesive aesthetic that it shares with, like, Mutt and Jeff and Lil Nemo and Slumberland. This is really well documented by most academics who study comics their entire lives. Like, most people would be able to tell you, yes, comic strips and even comic books, these could be considered even two subdivisions of one overarching aesthetic because, of course, comics as a medium have a unique way of looking and presenting themselves. But when I presented this idea to the aesthetics wiki, they were like, oh no, if there's an ocean-themed comic, that's just maritime aesthetic. If there's a horror-themed comic, that's just horror aesthetic. And they didn't seem to realize that comics have their own look and feel. That's why that one guy in the 60s, Roy Lichtenstein, he made that giant pop art piece with the fucking, comic-looking, like, airplane crash, whatever it's called, I forget. But, like, that's why he made it. That's why comics were so accepted in the pop art circles, because they do have a unique look and feel, and, like, word bubbles and fucking, sound effects and shit. It is a unique way that comics look that nothing else looks like. But you're going to argue the legitimacy of fucking cartoon core just because you happen to grow up with fucking Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls and shit.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell.
But you're not willing to acknowledge the individuality and the legitimacy of comic core. So you're treating comics as a medium as invalid, and you're treating cartoons, particularly just like cartoons on Cartoon Network, as valid. And I think that's totally fucked, and speaks to an innate bias on the part of the aesthetics wiki that they weren't willing to notice or account for. Another incident in the aesthetics type field that kind of turned me off to it, this was back when I interacted a lot more online and tried to actually post and stuff, was I joined the Discord server for the weirdcore aesthetic. And I thought weirdcore was kind of cool. I was kind of into it. I was kind of like, ooh, some eyes, some computer terminals, some Windows 96 type grassy hills. Ooh, I like this. This is a vibe. So I was like, I'll join the weirdcore Discord server. And I tried to make some weird core of my own. I tried to take some weird pictures, MS Paint in some eyes, maybe some, some flowers or something, something to go ooh, some vibes. Oddly enough, they were so fucking gatekeepy and elitist over what weird core was and wasn't. They were like, this isn't weird core, this doesn't have the right color palette, or this doesn't have the right zoom in, or, whatever the fuck. And I was like, it's literally called weird core. The only requirement should be that it's weird in a specific sort of way, I guess, which the images I made were. These are a couple of them. And so the fucking gatekeeping elitists on the Weirdcore Discord kind of turned me off because they were like, oh, there's no Weirdcore music. I tried to make the case that there is very much Weirdcore music because a year before that I had happened on an actual playlist of Weirdcore music that perfectly captures the vibe and look and feel of Weirdcore images. And they were like, there's no such thing. That's trip-hop. That's not Weirdcore music. And I was like, God, you're so fucking stuffy and full of yourselves, and you're not just allowed to like have fun about an aesthetic and like explore it in deeper terms, because you've convinced yourselves that there's so many like limits to this aesthetic that you've called weirdcore that like you can't even like fucking experiment a little. There's no experimentation to it. It's just like take a fucking pastel color and put an eye on it, and that's all weirdcore is permitted to be. So I was like, well, yeah, fuck this. And then one of the mods on the Discord was like, you're Nicholas Cicada, aren't you? Oh, you're a troll. Oh, you're an autistic spurg. Oh, you piece of shit. And they just banned me for no fucking reason. And then I was just like, well, fuck you, you know, eat shit. Better off without you, you fucking loser. You know, to actually like ban a fucking artist from your server for no fucking reason. Who's just trying to entertain the legitimacy of this aesthetic that you like. And just because I like it, but also because I happen to be a real artist who says what I feel and, you know, actually expresses myself, I'm not allowed in your little secret club, so, you know, fuck it. I'm done with that. So right off the bat, there were some signs that aesthetics, at least in the modern context of them, and as defined by Gen Z, are extremely gatekeepy, poorly defined, especially on the aesthetics wiki, which, like I said, is collaborative software. I don't trust wikis. Like, Wikipedia is not a reliable source. I look at Wikipedia articles all the time, but not as like a reliable source. I look at them because I'm interested in how a bunch of randos from around the internet can create an article together that has some kind of semblance to reality. But like I look at the Denver article on Wikipedia, for instance, it's full of inaccuracies. It's full of outright bullshit, because the problem with Wikipedia is that it uses this outdated model. Like, on the one hand, it pretends to be legitimate. It says, oh, we're a real source. We do good research. We really focus on what's real, right? We're a trusted source of information. But then on the other hand, everyone editing is like this juvenile internet culture bullshit. There's so many fucking edit wars and flame wars and like insular drama. And I really think the world lost something when we stopped just using World Book and Britannica, you know, because those were cataloged and curated by like fucking experts who knew what they were doing and took the time out of their day to write a fucking encyclopedia. And now it's just like, oh, yeah, here's Big Tits 69 on Wikipedia. Yeah, let's get this guy to edit our knowledge for us and curate our information. Like, no thanks. And add on top of that Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia, is a libertarian asshat. I don't trust Wikipedia as a source of information at all. Like, if I want to learn about, for instance, let's just say, Close to the Edge by Yes, am I going to go to the Wikipedia page for it, which is a random mishmash of like 50 articles crammed into one by a bunch of randos? Or am I going to just look at a curated Yes blog by someone who's a big fan of Yes and consumes all their work passionately and has a lot to say about it, and personal interviews and anecdotes with the fucking band and shit? Which am I more likely to see as a legitimate source of information? I think this is a problem, and I think it's also a problem with smaller wikis like the Aesthetics Wiki, because obvious bias is completely ignored, and there are these arbitrary standards of notability, or like, this is real.
Here's an example of how easy it is to vandalize one of these wikis, which show up as public Google search results. Imagine actually taking wikis seriously as a source of information when they're this easy to vandalize. So, as you can see, here's my page on Minitubia, which is a wiki that's like Wikitubia, but for smaller YouTubers who have less than 1,000 subscribers. Here at the bottom, I decided to include a little section on my online controversies because I felt like leaving them out would be kind of dishonest, and people have the right to know that I have sort of been a controversial figure in the past because of things I've said or done online, because I'm autistic and I don't know how to communicate with people effectively. So this is how the section originally looked. Cicada has been a controversial figure since the beginning of his career due to him shamelessly plugging his comics on Reddit and other sites. His adversaries have labeled him a troll, a scammer, or mentally ill since 2019. Cicada denies all accusations. So I thought that section was reasonably unbiased, and probably my haters could also get behind it, because I do deny all accusations, but at the same time, those accusations have been made. I just don't put any stock into them, because they're bullshit. So I assumed incorrectly that my page would just be left alone, and not vandalized by people who have no fucking idea what they're talking about. But then, just this year, wouldn't you know it, some absolute fucking idiot comes along and vandalizes the section to shit. Cicada has been a controversial figure since the beginning of his career due to him shamelessly plugging his comics on multiple websites, most notably Reddit, as well as his generally combative nature. Cicada's extreme frequency to publicly ridicule/harass others who disagree or criticize his work have stifled Nicholas's public growth, most notably with the Hypnagogic Archives ARG, which was arguably Nicholas's big break. However, the ARG lost most of its devoted fans after conflicts between a fan-created Discord server and Nicholas arose. So there are lots of things there that are wrong. Like, for instance, generally I'm not combative. I'm only combative if you talk shit about me. Otherwise, I'm pretty nice, I like to think. Also, I've never harassed anyone. I have a tendency to insult people because they say stupid shit, like this wiki vandal, but I don't harass people. I don't go out of my way like to make people's lives miserable or anything, like people have done many times to me because I'm autistic, and people think it's funny to harass autistic people online. So then I changed the section to say, even less bias, because I think this is the least biased interpretation of my controversies, all things considered. Cicada has been a controversial figure since the beginning of his career because he is autistic, and much of the internet lacks the maturity to learn how autism works, or how to interact with autistic people. He has, as a result of his autism, been the victim of a harassment campaign on Reddit, although said harassment campaign has not been active since 2022. So, I feel that's the least biased recollection of the situation because I actually am just literally targeted because of a disability that I have no control over. And I kind of hate to admit that, but that is just the truth, and I feel like people should know that. So then the little shitfucker comes back and says, if you seriously think the internet is criticizing you for being an aspie, you really need to do some self-reflection. All you're doing is making the page biased. I added some screenshots and references to prove my point. The reason Nicholas is so controversial has nothing to do with his autism. It's because he constantly spams ads for his comics and is incapable of taking criticism. So then this horrible person links to actual proven anti-autism hate groups that are as toxic and horrible as, like, Kiwi Farms, actually even more horrible and shitty than Kiwi Farms, and calls these fucking things sources. And adds a little section that says, Nicholas rarely takes responsibility for these conflicts and has been known to blame others for his problems. Now, obviously, the problem with this line of thinking is that this shitfucker asserts that the reason I'm controversial has nothing to do with my autism, whereas, actually, it has everything to do with my autism. You know, because it's difficult for me to take criticism because I'm autistic, and obviously that is a result of my autism, and it's hard for me to listen to people in maybe the same way that it is for other people, and I just don't know what people are trying to tell me, and a lot of people are really stupid on the internet, and I have a kind of short fuse, and I don't like dealing with these people. So, this guy just keeps on trying to trigger me or whatever, and like get on my bad side and piss me the fuck off. So then I change it back and I say, please stop vandalizing my page. I haven't posted an ad for my comics anywhere in over 2 years. This is because I am capable of taking criticism. Judging me by what I did 4 years ago when I was an immature 17-year-old autistic person is like judging Joji as Filthy Frank or judging Lindsay Ellis as the nostalgia chick. I've matured, changed, developed, and stopped doing what I used to do because people told me they didn't like it. Now, this is true. I haven't been on Reddit in like 3 years, but for whatever reason, these pissy little Redditors can't seem to let bygones be bygones and move the fuck on with their lives. And I have, but they haven't because they're too immature. So then, this complete idiot responds, "For the love of God, Nicholas, stop blaming your actions on your Asperger's. In case you haven't noticed, most people who criticize/prank you don't bring up the fact that you're autistic. Heck, most people in the comment section of your crappy videos think you're high. And yeah, the fact that you're edit warring with me proves that you're very mature." So then I'm done with this conversation, so I just say, it does not matter whether or not the people who attack me mention my autism directly. Their inability to accept me for who I am is the result of an unspoken anti-autism bias. Anything I say or do which you might consider immature is the result of my autism, which I cannot control. If you do not accept my autism, you are intolerant, and I have no respect for you. Anyway, I don't care about this wiki or what anyone thinks about me anymore. I wish you nothing but pain and misery, bigot. And that's the last time I've even remotely considered interacting with this wiki or taking it seriously as an authoritative source because it's just so fucking easy to vandalize these things. And the mods and the admins who are supposed to ban these people just stand by complacently. And nobody seems willing to fucking ban these people already who just target random strangers on the internet for no reason and are just like fueled by hate and rage. So by the time you watch this video, my page on Minitubia might be vandalized to heck again, and I'll probably be the one who gets banned just because I called this guy a bigot, but I have no regrets, and I don't even take this wiki seriously or anything anymore, so like, you know, what you gonna do? I don't even care at this point. I am literally harassed so often just because I'm autistic that I don't know where to turn to or how to possibly clear my name from all, like, the slander that gets tossed my way. It's really sad.
So, I didn't think Rollerwave was ever going to be deleted from the aesthetics wiki because it clearly is a real aesthetic and it has so many notable examples of it that are real that, like, to claim it's not a real aesthetic is just fucking stupid. But this week, I got the notification, oh, this page has been changed, go over and look at it, category added, candidates for deletion, because there's no sources that prove it's a real aesthetic, even though it has plenty of lists of, like, albums, like Music Has the Right to Children, and visual stuff, you know, sources that I bothered to actually look up and catalog and, like, canonize into an aesthetic, and, oh, it's not a real aesthetic because it's not popular enough. That's what it really means. It's not popular enough. Gen Z doesn't resonate enough with it. The TikTok crowd doesn't resonate enough with it. So just because there's not 100 videos of it, and it hasn't really taken off as much as, like, Vaporwave, we're just going to claim that it doesn't exist.
What? What the fuck?
We're going to invalidate your lived experience, tell you that your reality is false, you know, just break you down as a person and as a human being without a lick of thought given to it. And this is the kind of approach that Wikipedia and all wiki software really uses. I don't even use the Nicholas Comics wiki very much anymore because wikis are supposed to be collaborative, and it'd be really fun if there were a bunch of Nicholas Comics fans editing the articles with lore and thoughts and details, but nobody does that. So I have to like write the articles on all of my comics and movies and shit, and that's no fun. And then also, I can't even ban people who break the rules on the Nicholas Comics Wiki, because fandom doesn't allow you to become a moderator on your own fucking wiki that's based off your own fucking intellectual property if you're like banned from some other wiki. And I was banned from some other wiki for some bullshit reason, so now I can't be made a moderator on my own fucking wiki. So it's like, why would I even use this fucking software that doesn't even allow me to like ban trolls and spammers on my own fucking wiki? That doesn't even make any sense. But then I can't use like MediaWiki or one of those more open source softwares because you gotta pay for them and like learn them, and it involves a bunch of fucking coding and shit. And that's not fun for me. That's a waste of my time to learn to use all that shit, because I don't really believe, again, in the ethos of wiki software at all. I just figured in the early days having a Nicholas Comics Wiki as like a repository of basic knowledge would be a useful resource for Nicholas Comics fans, but nobody even uses it. I was like, surely the deletion of Rollerwave must become some kind of mistake, because it's been up for 3 years and everyone's just kind of agreed, oh yeah, this is a thing. It's not necessarily the most popular aesthetic, and I knew it really wouldn't be when I made it up, because it's like, oh, you know, of course not. Not as many people are going to be into the 70s futurism as the 80s or 90s futurism, but you know, it's its own thing, and just leave it alone and respect it. You don't need to delete the page to save on bandwidth or whatever. It's really not worth that. I thought that there must be some kind of mistake, so I went back, added sources, added the posts that my pal Vaporwave Master 1 made, and I added the Tumblr blog that catalogs Rollerwave extensively in like serious detail, and I added, you know, the entire Rollerwave album I've made, because obviously you can't have an aesthetic that isn't real when like there's actual examples that you can point to of an album being made that calls itself Rollerwave and can't really be defined or categorized as any other genre. It's just Rollerwave, and at that point an aesthetic is real. This, I think, is the ultimate criteria for whether or not an aesthetic is real. If you can point to something and say, yeah, that's the aesthetic, but you can also point to something that isn't the aesthetic and say that's not the aesthetic, it's a real aesthetic. Whether you created it, whether you made it up, whatever, it's a real aesthetic. If you can discern between what it is and isn't, it's a real aesthetic. For instance, this year when I was making a show with Onion Girl, she has an aesthetic she made up called Autism Core, and I was kind of skeptical because it sounds kind of generic, and it's not really as defined as Rollerwave, but I listed off some bands like Devo and Talking Heads, and she was like, yeah, that's Autism Core. And then I was like, Blondie. And the girl's like, that's not Autism Core. So I was like, okay, it's a valid aesthetic. If you can name what it isn't, and also what it is, then I would say, yeah, you know what it is. You understand it. It's its own thing. Fine. That's what I think needs to be considered when deciding whether an aesthetic is real or not. Can someone look at videos and images and go, that's it, or that's not it? And that's all that matters, because aesthetics and genres, too, are a human construct. They're made up. Daniel Lopatin said that it was a thing. James Ferrara said that it was a thing. And the only reason that I'm not considered a visual or auditory pioneer on their level is because I was born at the wrong time. I wasn't born in 1994. I was born in 2002, so I'm a little late to the party. And I don't get to enjoy the luxury of a free and open internet that respects lived experience and personal autonomy and the ability to create an aesthetic on your own out of nothing. We live in an age where everything is constantly doubted and everyone wants to question you and go like, ooh, where's your source? Where's your source for this? We're at a point where I can't have a page on Wikipedia made about me because if I write a page about me on Wikipedia, it's considered a conflict of interest, even though I'm the primary source on my own fucking existence. And I would trust myself to write my own biography a hell of a lot more than I would trust some fucking randos on Wikipedia, and because I don't have any articles about me in the fucking New York Times, I'm not considered notable enough to have a Wikipedia article. It's a matter of personal invalidation. It's a matter of just destroying something because it's unique and individual, and you gotta have a fucking source. It's academic and journalistic elitism that fucking stinks, and the last place that needs to be is on a fucking aesthetics wiki. Like, Wikipedia, sure. The aesthetics wiki? No. There's lots of aesthetics on there that are way more fake and unsubstantiated than Rollerwave, and are just designed because, like, oh, it's the aesthetic of fucking Jimmy Two Shoes. That's not an aesthetic. It's just called Cal Arts, and it looks like shit. So, as I promised, this resulted in some explosive internet drama, because there's a point where I just reached the end of my rope. I added all those sources onto the Rollerwave article. I said, added sources, there you go, that should be the end of it. Shut the fuck up and stop invalidating my lived experience and all the work I've put into this. The deletion sticker was added right back on by the idiot fucking moderator of the aesthetics wiki, and it was like, that's not real journalistic sources. That's not real journalism. I guess by those standards, I'm not a real journalist because I don't work for a real newspaper. Fuck all the interviews and shit I've done over the years. None of that is real journalism. Real journalism doesn't exist. Either something is journalism or it's not. Same way a real aesthetic doesn't exist. It's an aesthetic or it's not. All these things are human constructs. I was done, so I just wrote on this particular moderator's message wall, fuck your journalistic elitism. All aesthetics are a purely subjective human construct, and your pedantic insistence on defining what a real aesthetic is will ultimately result in this wiki becoming irrelevant and unused. Nobody will remember anything you've done in 20 years. Because I think that's true. And maybe nobody will remember Rollerwave either, but that's okay. Because what I've noticed is if I search up Rollerwave on Twitter or the like, all that comes up is a bunch of shitty AI art prompts. Because the type of people who categorize art into aesthetics, sadly enough, also seem to be the type of people to make shitty AI art is just based on, like, aesthetics, and don't actually have any respect for the artistic or creative process. So there's just a bunch of spam on Twitter that says Rollerwave, but carries none of the legitimacy or actual gravitas of the aesthetic as I originally purposed it. And that's sad to me, to think that people will just abuse a term, and it's kind of gotten out of hand and become lame and sad. So if the Rollerwave page on the aesthetics wiki is deleted and its existence is delegitimized and visible for only a kind of cult following, as it seems is the case with everything I produce, that's fine by me, because really I don't want it to be seen by the Twitter crowd as just another aesthetic to rip off and destroy with its shitty AI art garbage, Elon Musk, dick-sucking type attitude. That's not really what I intended. So maybe this is for the best, ultimately. I don't know.
So, this is the response that one of the mods on the aesthetics wiki gave to my initial complaint. Just to give you a basic idea of how little the people who run this wiki actually care about their own contributors. Hi there! This move is supported by us. Your page was a holdover from the time that personal aesthetics were allowed on the wiki. Now we are focusing on pages where the aesthetic has documentation beyond just the wiki page. While 1970s roller skating culture does exist, and keep in mind that's not what fucking Rollerwave is, your page does not have an encyclopedic writing style and connects various elements that were not linked together in the past. Also, your last sentence is incredibly rude. So then, finally, I decided to go for it. And I left this message on the Aesthetics Wiki Discord and left and haven't looked back since. Dear Aesthetics Wiki, hi. I would like to state that I no longer endorse the Aesthetics Wiki as a reliable resource for aesthetics. While I at first mistook it for a reliable and comprehensive database of visual styles, I have come to recognize it as a corrupt, disorganized cartel of TikTok-obsessed suck-ups. You actively make art worse. Your refusal to accept people's personal aesthetics, or even lesser-known aesthetics used by multiple people like Rollerwave, and modes of expression will only create a rise in homogeneity and prevent the rise of new forms of creative understanding. I hold nothing but absolute contempt for all of you, especially the two dumb fuck mods who support each other's asshole decisions because you have nothing to lose and everything to gain by doing so. Your elitist gatekeeping attitude makes me want to hurl, and while you might find it rude for me to call out your toxic self-destructive behavior, what's actually rude is to deny the validity of the work of the artists who perform free research on your behalf, without whom aesthetics as a concept would not even exist. Your behavior is ethically unacceptable on every level, and I stand firmly against it. Go fuck yourselves. Art forever. Nicholas R. Cicada, professional cartoonist.
But there is good news, because I found out that there's an aesthetic called super graphic ultramodern that's much more agreed upon in academic circles and basically is 1970s futurism and has plenty of articles written about it and shit. Not on the Aesthetics Wiki, mind you, but on sites like the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute that are actually like vetted. And that's way more gatekeepy than the Aesthetics Wiki, but at least it's gatekept by like people who are actually invested in cataloging large galleries and quantities of visual aesthetics and imagery and stuff. So super graphic ultramodern is kind of just Rollerwave. It's what people called it contemporaneously, which is kind of what I wanted to know. Like, what did people in the 1970s call a Rollerwave? What did they refer to this aesthetic they were creating as? And it's super graphic ultramodern. So I guess that's kind of the answer I was looking for all along. I'll maintain until I'm dead that Rollerwave and super graphic ultramodern can both be considered completely legitimate aesthetics unto themselves. And you know, they have some overlap, but they're kind of different things. My Rollerwave albums will stay on the fucking internet until I'm dead, and that's cool. But ultimately what this speaks to is that the internet isn't about preserving information. It's not about like facilitating access to knowledge, and it especially doesn't encourage the process of creation or the facilitation of new ideas. It's a very cliquey, toxic, gate-kept inner circle of jerkwads who just want to gatekeep and be all insular and don't want to open themselves up to other people's experiences or perspectives. And it has no function as like an actual archival resource or like an actual place where people can figure cool things out and talk about stuff freely and openly. And I know I'm going to be banned from the Aesthetics Wiki forever from this, but they deleted my article on Comic Core that I made, and they deleted this article now, so fuck them. If you want to learn about Rollerwave, I'm all too happy to make a follow-up video or something to it as a resource for you, so you can actually like educate yourself. Ultimately, I think, in a derivative climate like the modern internet, where everyone constantly needs sources and validation, and like just like this toxic attitude of, oh, this isn't real because there's not a New York Times article about it. I think it's very important, especially for us creative types, to just value your own output and what you make, and don't let anyone tell you that it's invalid because it's not. And just like, you know, live your own life. Give anyone who tells you otherwise the middle finger. You can't mess around with these types of people. And these type people are just like parasites of knowledge that ultimately ruin it for everyone. But like, if you really want to tell me that Bonkers here doesn't have a unique aesthetic that I really resonate with and enjoy, then go off, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it does. This is Rollerwave. I made Rollerwave. And I hope you like it. So I can't wait to see what comes next for Rollerwave. I'm really excited to catch you later.
Parte one area where being alert really pays off. You made that flame way too high, and you left the